Welcome back to another edition of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum podcast. On May 28th and 29th, the museum hosted the annual Chuck Wagon Gathering and Children's Cowboy Festival. Join us as we take a look at the traditional method of cooking on the trail.
It's really a pleasure this afternoon to be here with Sue Cunningham and Jean Cates, sisters from the C-Bar C Ranch over in Hartley, Texas. And it'd be nice to hear, these are two ladies who have got a great heritage in chuck wagon cooking, going back to their fathers cooking with the Matador Ranch. And it's a great story. Could you tell us about that heritage with the two of you?
Well, first he started building tanks, and whenever the cook would quit or something, they'd come get him off the Caterpillar, and he'd have to fill in as chuck wagon cook until they got a cook hired. And so at that time, he kind of got interested in chuck wagon cooking.
Well, your father, Dick Shepherd, you said he was filling in. He'd go back and they knew he could cook, so they'd get him off of one job working with the tanks and fill in for the cooks, and then he went on to cook for which ranches?
Well, he got a wagon of his own after that, and he got an old XIT wagon off the XIT wagon ranch, and he cobbled it together with whatever he had, and he went from ranch to ranch and did spring and fall roundups, and then he would do a little catering along too, and so that's how he really got interested in the chuck wagon cooking.
And then your father, how long did he cook for the ranches? And then when did you start being around the wagon with him?
Well, I don't remember. Do you? I don't remember.
We'd go out. Oh, I was probably 14. That's where I met my husband the first time. Mm-hmm. He was at the Matador Wagon. His great uncle was the cook there at that time. But we'd go out. Our brothers were also at the wagon. We'd go out and agitate the cowboys, and we'd help the cook a little bit. We'd wash dishes. Nobody else had ever helped him do that, and so I made a hit with my husband's great uncle that way. So we always loved him more, I think, than I did my husband. But I just dearly loved that old man. He liked me too. So, but we'd just go and he went from there. Well, he'd just go to other ranches at spring and fall roundup and take his wagon and cook. So, and we'd go agitating the cowboys there too.
Yeah. Well, one of the main things I was hoping to pursue this afternoon was talking about Dutch oven secrets. That your father taught you how to work with a Dutch oven. Y'all have been teaching people for a long time. I would say upwards of 40 years, if you won't hit me. But tell us a little bit of your secrets that you put in your 3 cookbooks and things about how to work with Dutch ovens,
I can tell you how to cook with the Dutch ovens pretty well. I do most of the Dutch oven cooking. Mm-hmm. This is with a cedar fire here. We cook our hot fire, and then we do our coals, our Dutch oven cooking with mesquite, because it'll make coal. Mm-hmm. The cedar won't make a coal. Mm-hmm. And so I put just a little ring around the bottom. If I'm cooking biscuits, just a little ring about like so of coals around the bottom. I don't put any in the center because your heat's going to go to the center anyway. And I do the same thing to the top. I put a ring, and then I don't put it in the center because the heat's going to go to the center anyway. And I'm going to do that, and I'm going to check it pretty often. People say, oh, you cook it so many minutes. I don't cook it so many minutes. I look at it. When it starts bubbling around the outside or even on one side, if it's bubbling on one side, because we don't cook in liners, we cook right in the Dutch oven. When that grease starts bubbling a little bit, I move it around so that a cooler place will hit there. And then when that starts bubbling, I set it off the bottom, mm-hmm. and then I finish cooking it from the top. Mm-hmm. I can always go back and cook it a little more from the bottom when I start taking them up, but I don't trust it. Once you burn them, you burn them. Mm-hmm. The only Sue can eat them then. Mm-hmm. She's the one that likes the burnt biscuits.
Well, I burnt my cornbread last weekend.
Well, I do the cobblers, and I fill it completely full of the hot coals, the cedar, and then after just a few minutes, like 4 or 5 minutes, I go in and I just lift it off a little bit off the center because the heat goes to the center, and then I'll turn the lid about a quarter of a turn. And I'd rather overcheck and not burn it than I had undercheck and burn the whole thing.
And she
and
does
you just
that
keep
with,
on.
She does that with mesquite, not cedar.
Yeah,
Mesquite.
Yeah. And do you usually, some people say put twice as much heat or coals on the top as on the bottom for most projects? Do you go by that?
To your wind.
The wind makes
Wind
all
is
the
a big
difference.
factor.
It does. Sometimes you can cook it in 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes. Makes all the difference in the world. And on a real still day, you'd think you'd have just perfect cooking. You just have to use more coals lots of times to keep it going because it just doesn't have enough. That wind picks up the coals and makes it kind of live, and that's when you're cooking more, hotter cooking that way. So we just learn from trial and error.
You can cook anything in a Dutch oven that you can cook in your oven at the house. You just have to know how to adjust your heat. And you have to, the weather, if the wind's blowing real hard, you don't put hardly any coals on there, period, bottom up or wherever.
It stirs them up.
Bottom up, because that activates the coals and they cook faster. Makes a hotter fire if the wind's blowing. That's why forest fires with the wind blowing is so hard to get out.
With your baked goods, like your cobblers and your cakes and things like that, do you use most of your heat on the top as opposed to underneath your oven?
Well, with our cobblers, we cook our filling first. We only put crust on top, so we only cook from the top. That's the type of cobbler we make.
Less chance for burning.
And
then you can cook it all you want to from the top, and you can check and see, which it turns out real good. But we have done quite a few with the crust too, but you got to be a lot more careful.
In your recipe books, you talk about forgiving crust. Yeah, it seems to be a pretty good recipe. I looked at it. What's forgiving about your famous forgiving crust?
Well, we went somewhere one time, and this lady just had to have our crust recipe, and so she was cooking for Brandon, and so she said, "Oh, I'm just not going to be able to do anything with this," and she had it in a plastic bag, and she set it on the tailgate of the pickup. She came back by, and boy, it just worked wonderful for her. And she said, "Oh, that's what I call the forgiven crust." So we've started calling it forgiven crust since then. But it's real simple, it's like 3 cups of flour and a cup of shortening, teaspoon of salt. Then you take 1 egg and fill the rest with water to 3/4 of a cup.
One of the things that you guys are pasteurizing some goat milk today. You said that you don't often do that. And that project is for what?
Okay, we're making a caramel pie that our mother used to make. And so Bob Gerling called and said, "Can you use this fresh goat's milk in your biscuits?" And I said, "Well, no, we don't use that in our biscuits." But we already had our list made out of what we were going to be demonstrating. And so we had Mother's caramel pie, and where you brown your sugar and then add your milk and all. And I said, well, we can use the goat's milk for that. So I have a friend that's feeding a little baby lamb that its mother wouldn't take. And so her neighbor has milk goats, and she gives her goat's milk for that lamb. And so I was telling her about it. She said, well, if you're going to use it for human consumption, you've got to pasteurize that. So I get on the internet and I find out how to pasteurize it. So what you do, you heat it in a double boiler, and you get the thermometer up to 165, and you leave it there for 30 seconds, and then you immediately put it on ice and cool it. And that's pasteurized then. And then it's good and safe it's got the bacteria out for human consumption.
Well, that's kind of fun. You take the traditional and the scientific, the treatment of the goat's milk, and then there's other gadgets, like you've got a fun little piece here for your coffee pot. I see. I'd never seen one of these before.
Yeah, now, we didn't think of this by ourselves, but someone gave it to us, and we've had more people to take pictures of it, but they can serve yourself like that. You'll have it full of coffee, and you just tip it and pour your coffee. Have your cup here. We could do the real thing if you want to.
And not burn your hands.
And not burn your hand. Come in there, baby. See, it just tips.
Our brother would say, anybody coming by, he'd say, oh, y'all come in, have some coffee with us. We didn't have that then. Come in and have some coffee with it. Liz, he always called it Liz. Liz, get them some coffee.
That was happened in Apple Valley, California. We were doing a tribute to Roy Rogers, and he went with us, and well, he called a lot of people in. Liz, get him a cup of coffee. Because he was our PR man. We kept him there to kind of keep him out of our hair for a while. Well, we wound up pouring coffee anyway.
Oh. Fire you've got today is really unique trench fire. We see a lot of those at the Chuck Wagon Festival. But yours, you said it was 1.5 feet deep, 1.5 feet wide, and 5 feet long. Been a lot of the historic photographs I've seen of the Matador and other great ranches and stuff like that, they'd have several fires around their wagon. What would your father do?
Well, he might not have one quite this big, but he might have 3 fires. One of the fires would be just cooking for keeping the mesquite going. The other one would be for the coffee, for the liars, you might say. They keep them out of your hair, to have one over there. And then your other cooking over for the quick hire fire, you're like you're boiling pots and stuff like that.
Yeah. So one fire would be a little ways away from the wagon, so the guys coming in for coffee, etc., to chew the fat, you keep them out of the cook's hair. Is that
right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Sue and Jean, it's been delightful to have you back for the 20th Chuck Wagon Festival here at the National Cowboy Museum, and celebrate the 20th year that you all have been in competitive Chuck Wagon cooking as well. It's been a great afternoon, and hope to see you again next year.
Well, we've enjoyed being here. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and stay connected to the museum at www.nationalcowboymuseum.org. We'll see you next time.